Good evening and a warm welcome to this special one-off Church Times Festival of Faith and Literature event. I'm Sarah Merrick, the Festival Director. Tonight, I'm absolutely delighted to be featuring the author James Runcie talking about his brilliant new book, The Great Passion. He's going to be in conversation with the Reverend Lucy Winkett. Before I hand over to them, just a few brief housekeeping matters. First, if you're watching in real time, you're very welcome to pose questions for James via the chat, and Lucy will try and scoop those up. Second, The Great Passion is available tonight via the Church House bookshop at a special discount, and the details are on the screen there. I know James has been into the bookshop this week to sign copies, but they are flying off the shelves, so do get your orders in quickly. And thirdly, I'm really pleased to be able to announce that the next full-scale Festival of Faith and Literature is going to take place in person next year in Winchester. The dates are the 24th to the 26th of February 2023, if you want to make a note of them now. And to find out more about the programme and when tickets are on sale, do sign up to our mailing list. And now it's my very great pleasure to hand over to the Reverend Lucy Winkett. Lucy, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. We're really looking forward to this conversation this evening, and it's just been an absolute pleasure to read James Runcie's new novel, The Great Passion. James, I wonder if you're there. Hello. Fantastic.
I am here.
That's a relief.
I'm really here.
It's the most beautiful book, James. I really enjoyed reading it. Perhaps could you just, for those who haven't yet read it, just tell us about it. What's it about? We know it's got this Matthew Passion in it, but what's the kind of landscape that the book is in?
Well, the landscape is Leipzig, 1726 to 1727, 1 year. Bach is an enormous subject, and the St. Matthew Passion is an enormous piece of music. Arguably his greatest work, although that's Mass in B minor, St. John Passion discussed. But obviously, 20 years ago, I made a film about Bach for the BBC for a Great Composers series. And then a few years ago, I wrote a play about him, also called The Great Passion. And I've obviously been obsessed with Bach all my life, but trying to get this novel right, trying to get it into a novel form was quite challenging and required quite a lot of I had 3 goes at it, frankly. One told from the point of view of his wife, one told from the point of view of 5 different people. And in the end, I thought, I can't really do that. I have to tell it from something I'm a bit closer to, which is an 11, 12-year-old boy who sings in the choir. So it starts with the idea of what was it like to sing Bach's music for the first time? What's it like to make a kind of fly-on-the-wall documentary in Leipzig in 1726, well, more accurately, Lent 1727. So there is a build-up, but essentially the key drama is the 40 days of Lent in 1727 as we build up to a first night told from the point of view of a soprano choir boy.
And why would you say that you have become obsessed with Bach? I mean, can you put any words around that before we get into the novel itself? What is it about Bach that is, for you, makes him such an extraordinary composer?
Well, that is the key thing I've been wrestling with throughout the whole writing of the book. Why he has a strange combination, a unique combination of kind of mathematical purity, yet lyrical grace. And he's able to be what some people might think, and some of his contemporaries thought was austere, playing every variation on a theme which is playful. How can he be both serious and playful simultaneously? How can he move from being something that might seem purely technical to something extremely emotional? And I don't quite understand how he does it, but why is his music the music of such consolation in times of grief? Now, I know this is a massive, massive subject, but for me, that is the nub of it. And in our chaotic, disordered world, people turn to Bach all the time. And I think maybe it's partly because the more disordered our lives are, the more we turn to the order of Bach.
And there's a contradiction, perhaps you hear it as well, in the sense that Bach was a great improviser and was really churning out these cantatas every Sunday in Leipzig, yeah, wasn't he? And he was really improvising. But it also, to our ears, these years later, sounds complete. It sounds like it's telling you something from the beginning to the end. Is that something that you hear as well?
Yes. Well, I like to think it is from the beginning to the end, but it's also from before the beginning to after the end. It's as if it's always existed. And what he does is, I think, he uses existing hymn tunes, existing melodies, and then he plays upon them, as you know, he plays upon them and improvises around them, as if he's kind of squeezing all the juice out of a tune, all the juice out of something, and how anything can be transposed or transformed and played with. So it's as if there's a great joy in seriousness. I mean, I think that's the motto of the orchestra in Leipzig. You know, that's you have to be very joyful to be serious, and you have to be very serious to be joyful.
And why the St. Matthew Passion? I mean, you've started with you went straight out there and said it was perhaps his greatest work, which perhaps there'll be some comments about that in the chat. Sure. As you said,
people who believe the St. John is matter or the Mass in B minor. Yes.
So why the St. Matthew Passion? Why have you picked that?
Well, it's my mother sang in the Bach choir, my sister sang in the Bach choir. We listened to the St. Matthew Passion. We went to it every Easter, still do, depending on who's doing it and where we are. And it's a kind of absolute central part of the Christian year, and it's the musical accompaniment to the grief of Good Friday and that intense sorrow. So, yet it also has incredible beauty. So. It's always, and I think it's variety and it's mixture of chorus, solo, aria, duet, antiphonal singing. It seems to be a compendium of all the music that's gone before it, and also sets the agenda for all the music that's about to follow.
And how did you get into that moment where you were listening to that for the very first time, a piece that you are so familiar with? What was the process that took you back to that rehearsal room, and how did you imagine that rehearsal room?
Well, yes, there are two key processes of research. One is what you might call, laughably, one might call academic research. I'm not an academic, but reading the Bach reader, reading all the sources, everything to do with Bach, everything that exists, and actually you can go quite far. The Bach reader is interesting because it's this book of primary texts, primary sources. And it's not what you think it's going to be, because they're generally references for his pupils and complaints about not being paid enough, and lots of moaning about money, which all musicians and particularly writers do. They always complain they're not paid enough. So these are sort of, so you get an idea of that. But of course, we know through following the religious calendar and through the cantatas exactly what he was writing each week, because he's writing to a set text at a set time on a set day, and he starts on the Monday morning, has a week to write an 18-20-minute cantata. It's performed and rehearsed in full only for the first time the next Saturday, and then performed on the Sunday, and then the next Monday he starts again. But we know what he was writing, so we can know what he was writing 299 years ago today, and we know his process, and also the school timetable survives, the school rules survive. So it's quite straightforward to think about what kind of routine he lived by, what food he ate, what music he listened to, what texts he read. We know from his will the music he had in his house. We know the number of children. So all of these things, and you can start to put those together on what. There's no such thing as a typical day, but what a typical day might be like. There are two things we don't know. We don't really know what's going on in his head, and we don't know what it's like to feel and know the music. And so one of the first things I did after doing an initial tranche was to talk to musicians and sit in on rehearsals. And this was absolutely crucial, to see rehearsals amongst musicians, to see the passages they found difficult, everything they found hard. And I sat in on 3 separate rehearsals of the St Matthew Passion, one with John Butt and the Dunedin Consort in Edinburgh, one with Gotthold Schwartz in Leipzig itself with the Thomaner Corps in Leipzig, and then another with Tom Seligman at Dartington Music School. And all of that was fascinating, but there was one man called Adrian Chandler, who's the lead violinist of La Serenissima, who's a wonderful violinist. And I was sort of struggling a bit. And he was rather amused that anyone should dare write a book about Bach or a play about Bach. It was a play at the time. And he thought, well, you're going to have a real challenge there. I presume you'll just do the faith. And I said, no, I want to think of him as a working musician as well as a man of faith. I want to think about this man not as pious 62-year-old legendary musician, but a man becoming Bach. What was Bach like before he became Bach? What was he like as a young, insecure, ambitious man? So he's 38 when he's writing St Matthew Passion. There are no portraits of him at 38, so you have to imagine what he might be like. Whether he had his own hair, all that kind of thing, what he ate and what he drank, and the number of children we know and all that. So I talked to Adrian about this, and he performed a Bach partita with such astonishing string-breaking attack. It was like the music had to be wrestled into submission. He played with incredible pace, and it was an extraordinary performance. And we know that Bach lost his temper a lot. We know that he had a temper. And so I thought that's interesting to have a kind of controlled fury. And then I went to see him conduct a dress rehearsal, Adrian, this is, a dress rehearsal on a Friday morning when the first performance was that night. And it was very, very tense. And some musicians were late, a violinist and a cello player were late. He was very cross and said, you know, you're letting it down for everybody. And this is appalling. And I could see both the temper and the fear in his eyes, the fear that this performance was going to be terrible, you know. Now, I mentioned the two things that there are two things that I kind of do know about. One is being a boy, and the other is putting on a show, because I put on loads of shows. And I certainly know the feeling that we open tonight and the incredible bowel-emptying fear that fills your whole body. You think this is going to be a complete catastrophe. Anyway, he resumed rehearsals, and 20 seconds in, I mean, I don't know, 8 bars in, he said, stop. There are 3 rules. 1, watch me. 2, watch me. 3, watch me. Now listen, behave, start again. And I thought, blimey, that's what Bach might have been like. That is exactly what it'd be like. Not this kind of dreamy person waiting for God's inspiration to strike. He's a working musician using what he's got, but it's up to him to get on with it. And I suddenly thought that the ferocity of emotion, this is not some spiritual exercise. This is really ferocious musical thought, and to try and find the absolutely best expression for everything he's trying to do, and to not dilute it with incompetence.
It's as if everything's at stake, I
Yes.
guess, isn't it? Or there's a lot at stake. James, you're going to read us some, I think, and you've already mentioned the kind of domestic setting. We know a little about Bach's domestic setting, but I think you're going to read a bit from the novel now. Thank you.
I am, yes. So this is a bit early on when, because Bach comes to Leipzig in 1723. He's a family of 8. He's got a 2-month-old baby with his second wife, Anna Magdalena. He's got his dead first wife's sister with them, 4 children from the first marriage, and him. And they arrive and set up, and Stefan Silbermann, the narrator of this novel, comes to stay with them. He's taken in because he's been bullied at the school, and he becomes our journey in to Bach's life and his daily and domestic life, his behind the scenes. Because one of the things I think is important is to try and take the reader backstage, essentially, to show the reader what you can't see on stage, to go behind the scenes. So that's the idea. And this is just a tiny little bit from when Stefan first arrives in the Bach household. Throughout the house, singing was as familiar as speech. Anna Magdalena sang folk tunes from her childhood about the lark and the raven, the old wood turner, the maid and the river, the false soldier, the lonely swan. There were drinking songs, old hymns and lullabies, sometimes without words at all. Tunes were repeated, played upon, converted and reworked. We give music to any text that needs it, the cantor said. That is the joy of it, Monsieur Silbermann. A simple act of transposition, major to minor, or a change of key, and everything is different. It's like the bounty of God's grace, always revealing itself in different ways. So that's the little reading from the passage of First Domestic Idea, and he gets taken in, and they're all singing both secular and religious songs. There's almost no distinction between the secular and the religious. A tune can be repurposed in any way. That is, if you have a dance, you dance. You can dance to the glory of each other or the glory of the Lord, and you can pay homage and tribute to a secular Lord or the Lord God. And it does matter. It does matter who you're doing, but the tune can be repurposed in any way. That's the idea, anyway.
Wonderful, wonderful. I mean, music is clearly, you know, it runs through the whole of your writing in this novel for obvious reasons. But what are the other themes that you're wanting to explore apart from music itself? Or is music the vehicle or the language to explore other themes?
Well, family, love. I mean, generally I write from Grantchester on, I write about faith, love and death, really, with the occasional jokes, but there are less jokes in this. Family, I think it's about what matters, really. It's a novel about what really, when all's said and done, what matters, what have our lives meant, and how do we make each moment count? And so it's about, I still can't articulate this properly, but this idea that we might, just as we rehearse a piece of music, we rehearse our lives, we practice our lives, we perform various roles in our lives. We're different, whether we're, we're different professionally than we are at home. We're different with some friends than we are with others. Who are we really? What is our essential self? What do we really care about? What really matters? Who do we really want to marry? What are the steps we took in our lives? What are the bad things that happened? What are the wrong choices we made? What are the right choices we made? And so it becomes a series of decisions. I think that obviously in 1727 in Leipzig, there was a lot more religious confidence, in the sense that although people did drift in and out of 3-hour services the way they might still do today, I'm not sure that faith was faith, and I think it was more of a fact. You know, that was a fact. I'm not sure, of course, but there was a certainty about it that maybe we have less of today. So, and what does that certainty give you, and what does it compromise? I'm out of my depth here in this bit of conversation, but because I'm not a theologian, but I'm interested in, we're all trying to do our best. So what is doing our best? What is doing our best as a father? Fatherhood is a theme that really interests me. I've got 2 daughters. I'm not sure I'm a very good dad, so there's a bit of that. So it is entirely about how can we be better people, and how can we extract as much meaning from life, the brief days we have? How can we make them as rich and meaningful and as sacred as possible?
That's really interesting. There was one quotation. I just wondered whether you thought this was a theme of the book, and you've just been talking about it. It's when Katerina talks to Stefan and she says, "Be bold with your life." I mean, is there a kind of carpe diem sense that you're trying to get across there, maybe? And yes. How does the St. Matthew Passion help us with that particular piece?
Well, I think there's a kind of extraordinary immediacy to it. I was very influenced by another really big thing that happened. It was really extraordinary. In Canterbury Cathedral, I think it was 2008, something like that, there was a really big service for a dedication of an altar. And the service was in Latin and French and Italian, and it lasted ages. But the thing was, it was just after Easter, and the Abbess of Bec, who was a very small, old, very elderly woman, came and read about Jesus appearing on the beach to the disciples by the shore, to the fishermen. And she came as if she had just come from the beach, and we were the first people to hear this. She was filled with this kind of extraordinary inner radiance and beauty. And I don't know, she must have been about 90. And it was heart-stoppingly beautiful, because she told it as if it was the first time. And there was no slack in the narrative. And that's what the thing about the St. Matthew Passion, there's no slack, there are no boring bits. You know, it's just listen to this. It's all attack, and then it's grace, and then it's beauty, and then it stops, but it has a lyricism that continues. And it's all, this is really important, listen to this. And there's something extraordinarily sustained about it. And I wanted to think about what that meant and how that was achieved. I mean, obviously in daily life, that can be exhausting because you do still have to go to Sainsbury's. But, you know, in between when you're not going to Sainsbury's, what is life about, you know, and how are we missing, you know, I don't want to live a life where you miss things, I mean, obviously we do miss things, we miss loads of things, but I want to live a life where of a sort of concentrated, ferocious interrogation of what it means to be alive.
And Bach's music for you does that, or you're addressed. I suppose one of the things that I feel perhaps about Bach's music is that we're addressed not as a passive audience, but as believers who are culpable in the death of Christ, but also able to be invited to be partakers in the joy and the, you know, the peace, exactly as you say it. So we're addressed as participants, not observers. Is that something that you hear as well?
Completely, absolutely, completely, because the chorus is similar to the Greek chorus in a Greek tragedy. They can stand aside and they can be involved, and we're implicit in it. So the chorus sings those great chorus moments about how we have sinned and we are involved and it's our fault, as much as being witnesses. So we're witnesses and involved. And I think sometimes it's the most extraordinary thing is that I have this line, it's as if our lives depend on how well we listen to this music. You know, if our lives depend on it, because if we really understand the nature of suffering and redemption and the utter harrowing grief of death and the utter possible joy of redemption.
So there must be times when we can't hear the music. I mean, if it's that demanding and the risk is that great to be in the presence of this music, are there times when we can't or shouldn't listen to it?
Yes, absolutely. I was with somebody last night who said, I don't think I can face it this Easter. Frankly, I'm not sure I can, because I've been thinking about it a lot and talking about it a lot. And actually, you do have to ration it. And I was at this event where I walked on last night and they thought, we'll have a bit of St. Matthew Passion as background music as you come on. I thought, this is not background music. It really is not background music. What are you doing? And this woman said to me, I can't, it's too much. You have to ration it, really. It's like the richest thing. You can't have it all the time. You know, it's just, well, you could, but I just don't. I mean, if you need a break, and the break is, fortunately with Bach, there's the Brandenburg concertos, there's the well-tempered clavier, there's the Goldberg variations, there are violin partitas, there's absolutely loads of music. And then, of course, we've got Handel, Mozart, you know, but generally in the Bach world, he gives you such an extraordinary musical arena, from the sacred to the secular, from the utmost joy to the utter despair. Sometimes, of course, in the same piece of music. I mean, that's the most extraordinary trick. I mean, technique, beauty. I mean, my favorite cantata is Ich habe genug, 82, cantata 82, which has the most devastating sorrow in it. And yet the joy of having seen the Lord, I've had enough, I'm ready to die, Simeon, I'm now ready to die. And this extraordinary tierce to Piccadilly at the end, where it's utterly in a minor key, and then suddenly, bang, the last chord is a major chord, as if the gates of heaven are opening. And it is, of course, a trick, but it is the most beautiful musical device, where we go from minor to major in one chord, and suddenly everything is not all right, but open again. And how he does that, and how he can wring so much beauty out of so much sorrow, is the most extraordinary achievement, I think.
It might be a good moment to talk about silence as well, James, because that's quite a theme of the book as well, isn't it? That I think in the description of the performance of the St. Matthew Passion, the narrator says he never heard such silence after the performance as on that first performance. And you talk a lot about, music coming from silence and going to silence. What's your reflections on that?
Well, as our lives do, they come from silence and go into silence. So this book has a blank page at the beginning, which is silence, and a blank page at the end, which is silence. Silence frames our lives. It's like the frame around a painting. And I feel that you need, and the last word of the St. Matthew Passion is, of course, rest. So you rest, and you will, everyone knows that when a conductor ends the St. Matthew Passion, his or her hands stay in the air for an incredibly long time, because we just can't break this moment. And they're held for a very, very long time. And then very slowly, whoever it is, they lower their hands fantastically slowly, and there's still no applause. And sometimes there's no applause anyway, but there's still no applause, because you just have to think about what you have witnessed, what you've taken in, what you've shared. And that's obviously the nature of the sacred. That happens in a religious service too, that ends and begins in silence, and our lives, as I said. So it's a way of thinking about, because it can't be, our lives can't be all noise. And the moment they are a lot noise. They're very noisy, very screeny, very noisy, screen and screamy, I suppose. There's just so much noise, and it's almost as if people are afraid of silence. You know, like when you go out to lunch with somebody and there's a bit of a silence, you think, oh, I should be talking, but maybe silence is all right. You know, I don't sound like a man who's used to silence, but I'm talking to you now. It matters that there's this balance between, I suppose, readying and steadying yourself for the music, ready and steadying yourself for something special, because it is special. This music is incredibly special and rare if you don't play it every day or don't listen to it every day. It has something that is, you know, uniquely beautiful and can't be taken for granted.
Do you think we are afraid of silence because we're somehow afraid of the great silence, that our voices will at some point fall silent, i.e. our death? Do you link those two things or not?
Well, yeah, I certainly link those two things. And I was just thinking a very complicated thing. When my mother was dying, my mother took 5 days to die in a hospital. I was there, and I literally didn't know what to say half the time. And it was all right to be silent. And it was interesting because 3 priests came, and they had automatic language because they had a prayer book, and they could do the prayers and they could go away. And I had a rather unchristian thought, which is, it's all right for you. You just come in, say your words, and off you go. Some of us have to stay here a bit longer and work out how to improvise. And I realized that we don't have much of a constructed language around death, and that is problematic. And it's also problematic around funerals and crematoria, and the fact that you have, it's a real problem in life in general, that, you know, can a life really be ended by 15 minutes or half an hour in a crem, and then back to work in a week or 2 weeks, and you're expected to get over it, you know, and, you know, are you feeling a bit better, or you should have got over it by now, all these kind of phrases. And you think, well, no, I haven't got over it by now, actually. And it's almost, of course, we live in a culture that I feel this, that is embarrassed by death and embarrassed by talking about it. Whereas for Bach, death was completely constant. Death for Bach was not an interruption, it was a constant. So his sister, Johanna, died at 1, his brother Johannes died at 6, his mother died when he was 9, his father died when he was 10, his first wife died when he was 35, and 11 out of his 20 children died before he did. So he was, you know, and he's taking funerals all the time. He's at funerals rather like a priest, you know. So death was familiar and daily and constant. And because we sometimes are frightened of it, or obviously I'm talking in massive generalizations here, and it may not be helpful, but I feel that only by confronting the fact of death can we work out how to live.
And perhaps one of the things that you're suggesting in this book, I don't know, is that Bach's music is monumental enough to hold the grief that is seismic and overwhelms us as human beings when someone we love dies, or when we confront the reality of our own death. And I mean, you said that love, grief, and death, faith, are themes that you often write about, and grief takes its place within that, and is a big feature of this novel, isn't it?
Yes. Well, I think the thing about the Somatic Passion is it's both monumental and intimate. I mean, that is one of the most extraordinary things about it. You can have these enormous choruses, these beautiful, big, sustained choruses that are full of sorrow. Some rage is part of it as well. Rage, can thunder and lightning, all that, enormous rage. And then the kind of bare simplicity of truly this was the Son of God, So it moves between the monumental and the intimate. And it's like a sort of grand stage, and it's taking place in your bedroom. And that's the most extraordinary thing.
I think you have another extract to read us, James, from the novel.
Yes, this is a bit from later on when they're rehearsing the St. Matthew Passion. And like in all things, when I went to Leipzig, the boys, they were schoolboys, and it was the end of the day. The first one I went to, it was 5 o'clock, and they'd all been playing football. I don't know, they were all they were hungry, and they just were not paying attention. And the Gotthold Schwartz went a bit mad and said, "Stop thinking about supper. Stop thinking about potatoes. Concentrate on this." And you could see them giving it a go for about the next 3 minutes, and then back they were sort of, and obviously talking. Whenever it stopped, they would talk amongst themselves. Stop talking amongst yourself. Listen to what I'm saying, and the concentration was shot. And of course, it's a big thing to expect an 11-year-old boy to understand Golgotha. I mean, it's a really big thing, and and they kind of think some of them can't quite take it in. And so I've got this small passage because some people thought, why is it so long? We don't have that long to rehearse, and why can't you make it a bit easier? Why can't you do some easier bits to sing? Why is it all so difficult? And I have them grumbling, because I've heard amateur choirs say, "God, there's no let up. There's absolutely no let up. It's sustained. You've done one really difficult bit, and you put your score down and think, I can have a bit. Oh no, I can't have a bit of a rest. No, I can't have a rest. Oh no, turn over the page and you think, oh my God, there's this. Oh God, this is even harder. That is tricky. So this is a tiny bit of Bach talking to them and trying to explain what's going on. "I know that it's hard for all of you," the cantor replied, "but if I make the music easy, we're already defeated. Our sorrows will have conquered us. We must let people know that we are always more than our suffering. Remember the words of the prophet Isaiah. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to comfort all who mourn, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes." That is what we are offering those who come to hear the Passion. Remember the doubts you've had before your performances in the past and how you came through them, how happy you were with what you'd accomplished, how glad you were when it was over, and how much you look forward to singing again. This is what we do. We face our terrors and we hope to triumph. Our faith will protect us. Our talent will see us through. Beauty instead of ashes. So that's a little reading, and of course that also conveys something of what it's like to do theatre and performance. And I talked about what it's like to be a schoolboy in a school choir, and it's as if they're putting on a school play, one that just happens to be the St. Matthew Passion. And of course, one of the mad things about working in theatre, particularly theatre, but telly too, but one of the mad things is you have these, as you know, Lucy, we're building up to a performance, you feel sick and you think it's an absolute, you can't do it, it's going to be awful, things are going to go wrong, and you're never going to get that bit right. And it is really, and you think a week or a day or an hour before, I am never going to do this again. I am never, ever going to do this. This is mad. This is an utterly bonkers profession. What am I doing? Who do I think I am? This is crazy. Performance, you do the performance, goes really well. Somebody gives you a glass of something refreshing, and you think, great, when are we doing it again? And all that anxiety is gone. And it's the most bonkers thing about showbiz and performance. And I was trying to get that in this as well. The fact that it is obviously it's a triumph. That's not a spoiler alert. I mean, obviously it goes quite well. Although some people do say, a bit long. Could have been a bit shorter, but a line I rather like. Somebody come out and saying a bit long. But generally that is theatre. And I'm trying to get, what I'm trying to do is make it as real as possible based on what I know. As I said at the beginning, I don't know what it's like to be Bach, but I do know about performance. I do know about boys. I do know about biblical interpretation and how to try and put it into music. I do know about grief and sorrow and how to attempt to wrestle with it and try to come to terms with it. And so you put all those things in rather than other things that you know less about. So, of course, as a result, it becomes a very personal novel.
That was something I really enjoyed about it, because you really do feel the kind of embodiedness, or that, it's quite a fleshy novel in the sense that it is about that, exactly that fear and leading up to the performance, and then the music somehow is ethereal, but you don't leave us up there. You're very keen that we make that connection between actual real human beings, contingent, mixed up, cross, then producing something which seems utterly godly. The two are very closely together, aren't they?
Vitally important that they mix the earthy and the earthly with the sublime. It's vitally important that it's rooted on earth and that you are grounded while looking at the heavens. And when you're looking at heavens, you look back down to earth. It's really important to me that you work in between these two spheres, as it were, or these two extremes. Now,
sorry, go on.
No, and always remembering that the rumor, the myth that Luther wrote A Safe Stronghold. Ein fester Berg, he wrote it on the loo. So one of the greatest Reformation hymns written mid-crap. Is this true? I don't know, but it's been a story that's gone on, so that you can't get much more earthly and sublime than that. So, but that idea that I wanted Bach not to be, because I don't think faith should be, something removed from life. I think it's, for me, it's messy and complicated and fluctuating and hard. And I don't think it's easy, and it needs to be worked out and practiced, just like music needs to be practiced and life needs to be practiced. We don't get things right first time. If it was easy, well, we used to say when I worked in television, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. And then, of course, we said everyone is doing it, actually.
I'm just going to encourage our audience to send in questions and comments. Please do, because we'll put those in as we go along. There is one here, James, as we go along, from Mark, who asks you, what do you think are the main differences between the St. Matthew and the St. John Passions? Well,
I think that I think the St. John has a much stronger opening in a bizarre way, and of course he also uses a bit of the St. John, because the 1727 is an early performance. There's no ripieno choir in that. He then modifies it and borrows bits from the St. John. It's as if the St. John is transmuted into the St. Matthew. I think the St. John is rawer and has rough around the edges, has less moments of extreme lyricism, but it has something, really originally interesting. And to say it's a first draft of the St. Matthew Passion is wrong. Of course, we don't know about the St. Mark Gospel, the St. Mark Passion, which is lost because there is a third. But for me, it's not. For me, the St. Matthew Passion is more resolved in a way. But somebody asked me this last night, and I can't really answer that very well, because I think you can have both. You can have both. They're both different things, and they speak in different ways. And I'm not really a music, and I had to really focus on the St. Matthew Passion. So and not being a musicologist, I got lost in this moment. So I can't really answer that well, apart from St. John is obviously an earlier work which has massive advantages in its freshness, rawness, roughness around the edges, and that St. Matthew Passion is much more, I think, assured and I suppose smoother. Not that it is a smooth piece of work, it just seems to have it's more rounded, it's more complete.
And again, I don't want to spoil the novel for others, but I was really interested in music, or in your use of music as an accompaniment. So it's not just the Matthew Passion, but for example, there is an execution as part of the novel, and music somehow accompanies this. And I suppose that led me to ask you. I mean, you know, you could ask yourself why music would be present at an event like that, for example. Yeah. But we turn to music at moments of extremity like that, or certainly like a funeral. And it seemed to me that there was a theme there about how people die,
yes.
and what music is. I suppose what music is played as people die, and I suppose there's as you say, beauty for ashes. It was a kind of big theme about it. But I suppose the question is in my mind, really, I suppose, about the morality, partly the morality of music. Can music be good in itself or bad in itself when it is used to accompany such an event as an execution, or when, as in Guantanamo Bay, it was used as torture, for example?
Yes, obviously. I think music is morally neutral a lot of the time. It's just kind of how it's employed. But the execution seems really important because I found out there was an execution in early February 1727 outside the city walls. And certainly the choir boys at the St. Thomas's School sang what were called Sturberlieder, music to accompany the dying. And so they would go out and sing at this execution. And obviously it's not a big leap to go from this boy watching an execution to then them coming home and writing about the crucifixion of Christ. And it was a way of moving from the secular to the religious in one fell swoop, as it were, and making the crucifixion as brutal and secular as possible, and as immediate as possible, and to then think about what would it be like if Christ was crucified in Leipzig instead of this prisoner, and how would they react in the same way, and would they sing the same songs? The other thing is that there are two other big deaths in the novel, and one of them involves a bass singer who then cannot sing as a result and refuses to sing because his singing has gone and has to be persuaded back into song because he's lost his wife, a beautiful soprano. This is not a major plot, but it's quite important about when you sing and when you can't sing. You know, by the waters of Babylon, we sat down and wept. Yes. When you can sing and when you can't sing, and when there are times when there are no words and there is no song, and there are times when music is the only articulation of sorrow that there is. So when a poem might not be enough, a song is, and a song or a music can hit you in a way that words alone can't. And then you start to use music in a way that no other art form can be used. And that's the thing, is to try and find the musicness of music, or the proseness of prose, the wordsness of words, to try and push the words to the limit, the music to the limit. So you articulate grief to the best of your ability in the art form you've chosen.
And do you have a favourite recording of the St. Matthew Passion, or a favourite, or a way that you like to hear it played? I mean, for example, Baroque instruments versus modern instruments, or any of those kinds
I don't. I mean, there are 5 or 6, you know, and interestingly, they've got pacier, you know, so a contemporary recording might be up to half an hour, 40 minutes quicker than Rector or Boehm in the 1950s, those big Germanic recordings, which are incredibly slow. And then you get John Butt or Paul McCreesh taking a bit of real lick. And Suzuki in Japan taking a real lick as well. I like John Eliot Gardner's 1988 recording, and I like John Butt and the Dunedin Consult's recent recording. And obviously one likes comparing them, but those are the 2 recordings I listen to most.
So you prefer a quote unquote authentic performance, the kind of lighter with.
Oh, well, this is a nice
whole minefield.
An authentic experience, an authentic thing would be boys only. You know, it would be no women. and it would be period instruments going out of tune. No, no, all boys. No, I don't know. I want to hear really good soprano. I want to hear Carolyn Sampson. I want to hear Joanne Lunn. I want to hear Nancy Argenta. I want to hear them. I don't want a 13-year-old boy. Leonhardt did it, and it's not a recording I particularly like. But it's me, and as I repeat, I'm not a musicologist. So there's no such thing as authenticity, really. We don't know what it really sounded like. We can have a guess. And also the most amazing thing, when you go to Leipzig, I mean, there are two really amazing things about it. One is you see the two organs. You see there's a massive organ loft, and then there's a smaller organ down to the side. And you think, oh, so two choirs, two organs, two ensembles, and it's automatic antiphony. And you see, oh, he's writing for this church, for this piece. So they're singing across the acoustic, they're singing across the spaces. And so the architecture becomes part of the music. The architecture, the sound off the stone is part of the music. He's writing for that space. And the other, obviously, astounding thing is that when you go there, they're all in the choir loft, all the orchestra, all the musicians, most of them, apart from the few that are in this Swallow's Nest thing, which doesn't exist anymore, but we're a modern version of it. They're behind you. They're out of sight. You don't see them. They're not racked up in front of you like the Bach Choir in the Royal Festival Hall. They're completely, you have to crick your neck, or you hardly see them at all. It's this sound from behind you. It's this mysterious presence. So if you want really authentic, it's all boys, slightly out of tune instruments sometimes, freezing cold, and you can't see them. Do you really want that? I don't think you do.
Possibly not. I mean, I guess, it gives you the freedom to focus on the cross, I guess, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. That is, of course, the idea. Well, that is the idea, but,
We've got a couple of questions coming in now. In 1727, Bach was writing a new cantata each week, as you said. Do you know how he had time to write the St. Matthew Passion in Lent that year?
Yes, because it's a musica pausum, so there's no cantata for 40 days. He uses music from existing. There's 6 hymns that he varies his pieces on. He has assistants. He has Picander to write the libretto. He does work like crazy, but he has 40 days, the whole of Lent to get. There's no other music in Lent at all. So there's absolutely no other music. So he does have 40 days, and he does borrow from stuff he's written before and repurpose it. So that's how he does it, essentially. I mean, it's a bit more complicated than that, but sure, for our purposes, that's how he did it.
But it's the pause of music in Lent is the
no
main
music at all.
Space. And Richard asks, could you say something about how you think an atheist might react to this work? What might they lose from the music?
Well, I know plenty of atheists who love it, and because atheists do experience death and sorrow, and they do need lyricism and beauty. And I think you can get a lot out of it, even if you don't have faith. A lot, loads out of it. And so because it has such an extraordinary understanding of suffering, and I think that it's always in movement. It's always changing. It's always changing between the big and the small, the choral and the duet and the solo. The musical arrangements are so vivid and varied. It's not operatic, but it has the sort of quality of opera. You don't need. These are all these things. You don't need to be a murderer to appreciate crime fiction. That's a facile thing to say, but you know what I mean. There is loads in it because the harmonies and the dissonances are so strong, and you do feel you've gone through something at the end of it, whether you're a Christian or not, I think.
And presumably, well, I'm not going to second guess your answer, but a lot of musicians who perform sacred music and a lot of church musicians who work in churches will say that music is their religion, so that they don't need themselves to have a confessional faith to be able to perform this music or to draw other people into the faith that they themselves don't profess. How do you react to that?
Well, it's completely out of my childhood, because my mother was a music teacher and said, where there's God, there's music. Where there's sacred music, there's God. And she only really, I mean, I can't speak for her, but she would say, I only find God in music. Music is my God. And the other thing is that she was an obsessive music teacher and would talk about her pupils all the time. When you asked her how she would talk about, somebody else's, one of her pupils, grade 3, and how, Simon Sebastian was going to fail grade 5 because he couldn't do sight reading. And she would talk about her pupils all the time. And I thought, Bach might be like that. Bach might talk about his pupils because all the books about references. And I know quite a few musicians, and they're obsessive. They are, a lot of them are, because they have to be, because they're often freelance. They have to practice like crazy. Not like novelists who just knock off 100 words and think, I've done that. It's really difficult. I'll have a coffee now. I mean, musicians have to get up like ballet dancers. They're very exposed, and there's no hiding place. And I think musicians, I've gone off the track of the answer to your question, but musicians find, discipline, order, beauty in music that is, well, let us say that music and practice can be a form of prayer.
Absolutely. We're coming towards the end of the time, James. I mean, we could talk all evening. It's amazing hearing what you say about the novel. Is there anything that we haven't kind of talked about that you would want us to know about what you're trying to explore in this novel?
Well, I don't think you set out to explore something because you set out to write. You have an idea and you explore it and you try to think it through. And it's a very complicated thing because when reality strikes, so you think you know things in theory, but when you know them in practice, So, I mean, I have to be careful here. I don't want to go into detail about this, but my wife died while I was writing this novel, and it was completely catastrophic. And so therefore I'd virtually finished it. But then, of course, you then want to rewrite it or retinker it in the light of the practical experience, because the theory of grief is so different from the experience of grief. And even if, and the loss of a parent, both my parents, is very different to the loss of a wife. Each loss is different. So you then have to factor that in and think, well, what does that mean? And how does it affect this novel? And how much do I put in and how much do I not? So, and how much do you make it very personal without it being self-indulgent? I mean, that's a real challenge for a writer, to try and not make it all. So you have to actually, it's the same as research. You do all this research, but you mustn't show it too much. You have all this grief, but you mustn't show it too much, because it's not about you, it's for the reader. And therefore it's not some kind of therapy that someone's paying you to do. It's supposed to be a novel. It's supposed to be, pleasurable to read. And so it's not something that you just download. So turning, well, I suppose, and this is very difficult, it may sound extremely arrogant, but you're trying to turn your grief into an art form. You're trying to turn your grief into something else. You're trying to make it manageable. And maybe that's what the St. Matthew Passion does. And maybe that's what Bach was doing, is trying to understand. You write, part of the idea of writing is you write to understand. You write to try and make sense of the world. You don't know what you think until you write it down. And so that's one of the great challenges, to try and articulate grief. And of course, I've written another book about Marilyn, my wife, because I had to. That's coming out later in the year, a memoir. But you're still trying to make sense of your world and the brief time we have. It's both brief and long, and the most bizarre thing. I mean, this idea that a day can seem a very long time and a year can seem very short. This odd thing about life and time, and how do you not waste it? That is, I suppose, what I'm trying to say. And how, if you have a talent, how do you use it? But in the end, I am telling a story and trying to make sense of a piece of music and a man and a legend, and trying to work out how he did it, and trying to help the reader, but take them backstage into a different world. And obviously the art of fiction should be about transportation. It should be about transformation. It should be about going into another world that enriches our own. And that's what music does most of all, far more than fiction does. But it gives you an extra dimension to life. It can be spiritual. It can just be purely musical, but it makes life worth living. That's the point.
James, you've been incredibly generous, not only with your time, but with your reflections. And thank you for everything that you've said about the themes of the novel itself and the story that you're trying to tell. It's such a pleasure to have talked to you tonight. I know that Sarah is going to come back and finish our session with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lucy. Thank you for being so wonderful.
Not at all. Thank you.
Well, all I need to do is to thank James and Lucy on your behalf for a really interesting conversation. If you haven't ordered the book now, you really need to. It's fantastic. I think you'll really enjoy it. The details of that are going to come up on screen. There should be a link there to show you the discounted price that we're offering at. And thank you all, our audience, for being with us tonight, wherever you're watching from. We hope very much to see you at future events. But for now, good night and thank you.
I think what we do is really important. The Christian church has to be united, and it can't be united if it doesn't know what's going on. The range of stories we cover is universal. The approach we have is comprehensive.
We're looking to help people, with ministry, mission. We also publish positive, constructive content which aims to help the church be a better church, and that's what we care about.
But we also look at things incredibly in depth. We take a lot of time with our stories, make sure that they're accurate, that they're very detailed, and the reader is not left asking questions at the end.
It enlightens bits of the world that don't get reported elsewhere.
I think what's really important about the Church Times is it's independent. We're not affiliated to any other organisation, so we're really free in what we can write.
If the church screws up, then we report it. If the church does something fantastic, then we report it. We deliberately don't have our own agenda.
One of my favourite things about the Church Times is our book reviews. I think it's really important because it points clergy and really interested lay people to what some of the latest theology is, academic theology, but also books about spirituality, things like prayer, and also social issues.
Subscribers can access 150 years of past issues through the Church Times' own website, which is linked to the UK Press Online site, and they can look at any of the issues since 1863 page by page.
So I really enjoy doing a cartoon for the Church Times when I've got a really strong idea and I know that it's something that the readers will enjoy.
A huge part of the service we provide the church is advertising jobs specific for clergy, but also for musicians, teachers, youth workers and so on.
The Church Times runs the Festival of Preaching, which is a chance for clergy and readers and anyone else who's interested to really explore the craft of preaching. The Festival of Faith and Literature is a literary festival with a theological slant, at which questions of faith and theology are explored. The Church Times Cricket Cup has been going since 1951. When they put on their cricket whites, the different traditions and the things that might divide them become much less significant, and it's definitely plays some role in helping forge Christian unity. The Church Times also runs the Green Awards together with the Church of England's Shrinking the Footprint campaign. It's a way to celebrate those churches that are leading the way in being good stewards of the environment.
One of the things that we do is start a dialogue between various groups in the church and really try and represent all views.
You ought to be able to read the Church Times and come out at the end of it more excited about what your Christian life is like.
The podcast was set up almost a year ago, and really the idea was to be a place where we could talk about the background of stories, how we came upon stories, provide some analysis of what's going on in the church and the wider world.
The Church Times is available on old-fashioned bits of paper. It's available on your phone, your computer, your tablet. There's an app. We make it as accessible as we possibly can. We're always looking for more subscribers, and if anybody wants to, it's terribly easy. All they have to do is go to the website, or they can even phone up.